An entire world is ready
for you to start your career teaching the path to wellness.
Mastering the science of mindfulness.
And the art of coaching.
To help clients achieve mental, emotional, and physical betterment of life.
Through movement,
nutrition,
recovery, and regeneration.
Because impacting one person impacts a family.
Impacting a family impacts a community.
And impacting a community impacts the world.
Become an NASM certified wellness coach.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Richey, and today I've got a guest with us, and I'm excited about it because she's a person that I've known her for a long time. We were hosts of podcast within the same network. So we were not host of the same show, but we hosted within the same network. So I had a podcast on the Everlast Podcast Network, the Everlast boxing equipment, as you may know of, and kickboxing and martial arts equipment. And she had a show on there. Now, mine was fitness related, but my friend here joined us, and she was on that podcast network for a long time. She is a fight host commentator. She is a martial artist, and she is here today to talk to us about the benefits of participating in martial arts. Welcome, my friend, Phoenix Carnevale. What's up? How are you?
I'm so happy to be here.
I am delighted.
And I am also an NASM CPT, CES, and NES. So this is great that we've continued to align here because of my background in combat sports and in physical fitness and 17 years in the industry. Can't even believe I just said that.
Wow.
And NASM really aligns with a lot of the things that I believe that bring people health and wellness and better quality of life. And to me, one of the things that brings in the best quality of life is training in martial arts. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm excited about this. So tell us a little bit, introduce us your story, martial arts, fitness, where those two kind of intertwined for you. And then we're going to get into discussing the benefits of it for our fitness friends and family out there.
Well, when I grew up in a single family household, and I was that kid with the asthma pump in one hand and the comic books in the back pocket. So my introduction to martial arts was Bruce Lee, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all of that stuff. And then I wanted to be involved with martial arts really badly, but I had terrible, terrible asthma. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s and I had my own money and I started working out and getting fit and getting certified that I was like, I have enough courage to try martial arts now. So I started karate as my first martial art in my 20s, which most people start at a very early age. And when you start in your 20s, you think oh, this is going to be impossible. But I started and I never looked back. And then I wound up studying Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and a little bit of Eskrima, and just really enjoying all of the styles and arts. And I wound up becoming a fight commentator on top of all of that. And then working strength and conditioning for fighters, which is very specific. As you know, NASM does have a certification specifically for MMA because it is one of the most dynamic sports in the world. And it's just been a very rewarding career that's taken me around the world.
Yeah. I remember listening to you. I think you were commentating on Friday Night Fights.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching Friday Night Fights. And then I was like, oh my gosh, there's Phoenix. I know her. I know. And too, I get to say about the fighters too. I may not know they're fighting, but then people pop up and I'm like, I know that guy that's fighting right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a really small world. And there's such a huge crossover between fitness and martial arts, right? Because it's an all-encompassing thing. You have to be super fit to do it. I mean, we joke, there's being in shape and then there's being in fighter shape. And it's a complete level up,
Yeah. So the MMA conditioning specialist that NASM has, we brought in a guy who had done conditioning for a lot of the top UFC athletes. His name is Scott Ramsdale, and he helped us put together this program. And then eventually we started bringing in not more people specifically for the MMA conditioning specialists, but subject matter experts that work within that world. Like Tony Richey is one of the guys that's within that world, and he is an exercise scientist. He does a lot of stuff with neurology, but he trains fighters, strength and conditioning. So I've had him on the show before. He's very careful not to step on the toes of the skills coach. Right. So the skills coach has their thing that they do. And then there's kind of the strength and conditioning work that the martial artist does. But right now we're going to talk about not just the strength and conditioning work, but the skills too. Like what are the benefits from your perspective, Phoenix, the benefits of doing martial arts? And now we're not going to go, we're going to do broad picture, and then maybe we can talk about age, because you mentioned starting later in life. I started jujitsu much later in life, and there are pros and cons to some of these things as well. But let's talk about the pros right now. What are the benefits of getting into martial arts?
There are so many things in martial arts that are essential to your core values as a human being. And a lot of those things are dealing with adversity, learning to stay calm and confident in very rough situations, being able to go with the flow and not control things, being able to focus from moment to moment. And then there's the physiological benefits. When we practice martial arts, it's essentially really good for cognitive performance, because you're processing attention, memory, rhythmic skills, just executive function. And as we know, as we get older, cognitive function starts to decline. So for the older generation, this is really, really important. And I'm not saying if you're in your 50s and 60s, you need to go out and get punched in the face. But hitting focus mitts is really good for your brain, because we know about cross patterning, bilateral movements, and how that stuff is good for the brain. It's one of the reasons why older people knit, because you're using both your right and your left hand, and that actually helps increase gray matter. I mean, there's so many studies to this. You guys could look a lot of this stuff up, and it's truly fascinating. We're talking about cross-patterning neural pathways. Another thing, I have a friend of mine who's like, hey, I'm in my late 50s. I want to do martial arts, but Muay Thai is so rough on the body. I'm like, don't do Muay Thai. Why don't you try Kali or Eskrima, which is stick fighting?
Yeah.
And again, those cross-patternings, that rhythmic patterning is so good for the brain. And it's essentially relaxing, like the same way that drumming is. And if you've ever hit the Kali sticks, you hear that sound. It's actually really beautiful and really relaxing. So martial arts really can be studied at any age. It can be studied in so many different ways and for so many different reasons. I mean, if you think about self-defense, if you have an umbrella and you've studied Kali, you've got a weapon. You are your own personal Jackie Chan in those situations. And for self-defense, the elderly are usually the ones that are victimized. So there's just so many reasons to study it, and cognitive function is probably one of the biggest reasons. And mind you, we can talk about how it helps with depression, how it helps with joint mobility. If you think about like cars, for example, right? Controlled articular rotations. Yes. If you're moving a Kali stick, right, and doing positions with like swords and sticks, you're really working the joints in such a great way. I have the tightest wrists in the world from punching, from boxing. Once I started Kali, I started moving my body in ways that I hadn't before. And what is sort of the worst thing you can do for your body is to stay in the same positions all the time, even if it's the same sport all the time. Yeah. Changing up your movements is one of the best things that you can do.
Yeah, we talk about that as a lot of times the injuries can come from two ways. One is repetitive movement, and the other is repetitive lack of movement. Yeah. And so you were talking about the repetitive lack of movement in your wrist. If you're probably wrapped up with the wrist wraps, maybe some tape, the boxing gloves themselves will support the wrist. And you spend a lot of time locked up like that, then the wrists don't really move. So it's nice to see that you add in some mobility stuff that is still within the wheelhouse of martial play. So, and martial means war. So let's get that out of there. War. It's war arts, but it's fighting arts. And sometimes there are some that are more artistic than others. Some are very focused on actual combat situations. Some focus more on point fighting. Like in jiu-jitsu, there'll be point fighting that you can go through with that. It's not just submissions. A lot of martial arts have that. And then some martial arts are things like Tai Chi that are a little more chill, a little more laid back, and kind of health, movement, and mobility centric, breathing centric, as opposed to some of the harder martial arts that are out there. All of these are fantastic. They're fantastic for your brain. They're fantastic for getting those synapses to start working together. And it increases what got popularized in a book by Dr. John Ratey called Spark. This BDNF, this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is something that allows what they refer to as miracle grow for the brain. As soon as we produce that BDNF, the dendrites start to sprout, and you start making more connections in the brain. And we always talk about the neurons that fire together, wire together. So we repeat those things, and then we start to create patterns, and those patterns start to get created through our brain that could be completely new. And this is something referred to as neuroplasticity, right? Our brains learn something new. By the way, Phoenix, I don't know if you know this, but neuroplasticity used to be a heretic if you talked about neuroplasticity. They said the brain could not change. You could not change anything within your brain. And then suddenly the research started coming out, and neuroplasticity started to be shown to be a real thing. And it shifted the way that we saw our ability to learn. And martial arts is one of those great tools where it uses both your brain and your body. And the combination of that, things like martial arts and dance and other things that are active, that include the body and the brain, seem to be very, very beneficial for how our brain functions.
Yeah, focused attention is something that's really important. And as we've gotten more technologically advanced, our attention span is not the way it used to be. And it's not that we've changed dramatically. That's not that our brains have changed in the last 15 or 20 years. It's that our focus and our attention has. We don't have to pay attention for as long as we used to. But when you're learning an art form, you can look, there's a guy, I think it's called Cognitive Collie. He's done a TED Talk, Paul McCarthy, not McCartney. Okay. And he has this Cognitive Collie, and he talks about that. He talks about how when you're learning a pattern for the first time, think about it, you're slow. You're like, okay, it's a 1, 2, 3, up pattern, and you have to say it to yourself many times until you go to that mushin, no mind state, where you've done it so many times that it becomes second nature. Just, think about when you first learned to drive. You're like, okay, look both ways, check this, you know what I mean? You do all that. And now it's second nature, and you're at your location. And it's the same thing with learning martial arts. And how great that, the gym, we could get really bored. Yeah. But when you're learning a martial art, there's always a new skill to learn. And then you watch yourself mature. You do jiu-jitsu. So for those of you who don't know, jiu-jitsu is a ground fighting art. Now, ground fighting is one way to definitely work your system in ways that it hasn't before. Think about it. How much time do you spend on the floor? But it's basically how you evolved as a baby to like stand up as a human being. It takes so much neuromuscular musculature to crawl. So now you're doing jiu-jitsu and you're back on the ground, and you have to work on movement patterns that you haven't done before. Using your legs more as arms, this patterning situation, using your core, lifting somebody off of you. There's all of these things that you learn. Now, in the beginning, because you're freaked out, you're panicked, and it's uncomfortable, your breathing's horrible. Yeah. And you don't know technique yet. So you're using way too much strength. And then you watch yourself and your neurological patterns mature, where you learn techniques where you can calm your breathing down. Learning how to breathe is one of the biggest things you'll get from martial arts. It is essential so that you don't gas out. I mean, you never want to gas out in a fight, but also so you don't freak out in an emergency type of situations. Like can talk about martial arts in many different subject matters in the terms of self-defense,
Yeah.
in the terms of arousal control, in terms of just patterning in general, in the terms of maturity as a person, because you have to really check your ego, especially with white belt, but really throughout all belts,
Yeah.
because you have to learn that the only way to get good is to submit, literally submit, tap out, or say like, I'm done, or I've done enough, or have an opponent or a sparring partner and say, why do you keep hitting me with this and that? And then, if you've got good sparring partners, they'll tell you, and now you have something to work on or work towards.
Yeah.
So the working on the self-control and the ego, these are all things that I think transfer over to life. Being able to deal with feedback, being able to know that, hey, you're not going to win every day. Not
Right.
every day is going to be a good day. Learning how to deal with patterns, the bad ones and the good ones. Learning how to go into these Zen-like states. All of this is stuff that is very transferable to life.
I love that. I love that. You were talking about the practicing, and you're right. Like everything that you said, I feel like you were right there watching me be awful in jujitsu and like work too hard and try to muscle through things and try to cardio through things. And then just realize that there are some people that are so low on the totem pole that are so much better than I am that can just put me in my place. And I was trying so hard to do. And what I realized first is that I need to calm down. I need to learn how to play defense, because unless I understand the defensive portion of it, it's very hard to get to a place where you can actually move into an offensive area. So I like something. This is something as football season, college football season in particular, is approaching. It reminds me of something that the Alabama football coach, Nick Saban, says. He says, we don't practice till we get it right. We practice till we can't get it wrong. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that, where that type of focus, that type of deliberate play means a lot, because you try to remember things and then you realize you just practice it for a while. You may not be able to articulate it, but you can do it. Your body just goes the way that you want it to go because you've rehearsed those patterns. And when you're doing the randori, so the sparring for jujitsu, you learn those patterns in totally different ways, because people are different. The way that you train, the way that they train with you, it's different for everybody. So you have all of these neural inputs that you're trying to solve for. It is a problem-solving situation that your brain is constantly trying to move. So it's an action reaction learning process that we go through. And I think I love martial arts. I'm a pacifist. Like, I don't like fighting, but I love martial arts. And, I love doing sparring, whether it's stand up, whether it's on the ground. But in general, I don't like to fight. However, and I thought about you this morning because I knew you were going to be on the podcast, and here I am at 5:45 in the morning going to the gym, and there's somebody out there right in front of the gym where I'm about to go in, and he's telling me, like, go on, go Pat, go. And I was like, okay, I'm going right here. He was like, right here? Like, he was being very aggressive. Yeah. And I thought, oh my gosh, I really hope that, like, I need to stay out here just to make sure that my client, when she comes in, is not going to be accosted by this. And then I noticed that the lights were on. I thought, oh, maybe she's already up there. So I went in. But the good thing about it, though, is that there was no fear. And I was like, no, you go ahead, as humble pie as I could be, submissive, trying not to aggravate anything. But at no point was I scared. If it escalated, at no point was I scared. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be scared, even if you know what you're doing, but it was that calm. It was, you mentioned it, the arousal control, how we handle situations as they start to get in a heightened situation. And that stuff, I think, is really valuable on not just for martial arts just for like health and wellness, but it also put me in a place where I feel more comfortable in an uncomfortable situation.
I think that's a big part of it. And also knowing yourself and being able to take a look at the whole situation. So I usually say to people that getting physical is not the first line of defense in self-defense. The first line in self-defense is to go home safe, however that means. That means you either need to use verbal judo, which is words that you say to get you out of the situation, or you need to run. If you think about the animal kingdom, animals are totally fine running away. There's no like ego about it.
Right.
There's something called I think it's called a flapjack octopus, and it scours the bottom of the ocean for worms. It's like the cutest little thing in the world. But the second it feels it's in danger, it jets away. It's extremely fast. It doesn't feel bad about itself. It just knows that it's avoiding danger.
Yeah.
As much skill as I have as a martial artist, I try not to fight first because I don't know where that physical violence is going to end up, even if I wind up hurting someone.
That's right.
So there's many times where I've had to use verbal judo to get myself out of a situation, but you also still feel if I have to defend myself, I will. When I teach self-defense, especially to women, I think the first thing that surprises them is how strong and how much power they can generate within their whole bodies if they utilize their whole bodies.
Yeah.
You know, as trainers, we understand sort of like the global movement system when we train our entire bodies with like explosive movements like Olympic lifts or kettlebells or whatever.
Yeah.
And you realize like how much physical force you can generate. And that always really surprises them that they have that in them. And then I'll say, what are you fighting for when it comes to self-defense? Well, generally you're fighting for your life. Now there's different escalations of situation. Like drunk Bob at the Christmas party is not going to get the same power and impact from me as like someone who's trying to physically assault me or rape me. You know what I'm saying? So there's different levels to how you do things, but within training, you learn you're worth it, you're capable, and that the physical part is actually should be your last resort.
Do you find that there are different ways maybe that you teach martial arts to, if you're different genders or sexes or different age groups?
Well, you have to take physical bodies into account, right? Like what could a child do as opposed to someone who's 70 as to somebody who's young and healthy and in their 40s. But every single person, it's not about like winning a belt out the end and like a competition of skill. It's I want to get out of here safely. So you're usually hitting vulnerable areas and you're doing things that help you escape. Right. So like there's just things that I'm capable of that somebody else might not be capable of. So you, as within any martial art, when you're a good coach or, even if you're a fighter, you know what somebody's attributes are, like, okay, if you watch MMA, you've got great wrestling. So, when you're going to utilize that wrestling or where your strengths or where your weaknesses are. And Bruce Lee will tell you this in many quotes we've seen where martial arts is about honestly expressing oneself. So all of our bodies are different. Like I might be really good at certain things in jiu-jitsu because I'm short. Like I might do great omoplatas, but my triangles is a little rough because my legs aren't that long. And I have to position myself differently as somebody who's tall. So martial arts is always going to be about blueprint techniques and then things that need to be tweaked because of who you are and where your strengths or your weaknesses are, or what your body type even is.
Right. Yeah, I was speaking with the Professor Luca Attila at the Upper West Side, Henzo Gracie. And after I was wrestling at one point, he comes and stands next to me and he was like, Rick, he goes, you're doing a good job. And I said, that always feels good. And he goes, it's hard, isn't it? And I was like, I mean, it is. And he was like, you're a smaller guy. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, with the size, there's the inability to produce as much strength as some of these big guys. I can't use my weight like some of these big guys. And he was like, so really, it's unfortunate, but you have to really learn to be a tactician because you don't have a size advantage. And I was like, man, it's so true. because when people say size doesn't matter, that in the fight world, that's not true. You do not want to get hit by, I mean, that's why they're weight classes.
We have weight classes for a reason.
There's
There's a big
definitely,
reason for that.
yeah, right.
And again, when we talk about martial arts, we talk about self-defense, but a lot of the times where I talk to people and I ask them why they train, some of it's self-defense, some of it's stress relief, some of it's something to do when they get home from work. And sometimes, and I think this is really beautiful, it's about being social.
Yeah.
It's about going someplace where there's a group of people and that builds communities. I mean, all martial arts schools are a little culty.
Yep.
We're
True.
all a little culty.
True,
Like
true.
I'll admit that, but that social affiliation and actually the release of oxytocin, which is a peptide hormone that plays an important role on regulating social behavior. This is something that it's linked to attachments. And we get very attached to our coaches. We get very attached to our teammates. There was this beautiful moment. I love Daniel Cormier. I've interviewed him many times. And he is in the commentary booth, and Luke Rockhold, who had just retired, is walking off the cage, and he's walking back to the dressing room. And he chases after Luke, and he taps him on the shoulder. And Luke turns around, and he's like annoyed and aggressive. And then he sees it's DC, and you see both of their faces melt, and they embrace. Because your training partners, they put you through hell. And why? Because the iron sharpening iron and the tools and the things that you experience together as a teammate and the way we push each other as human beings. I have friends that I've met in martial arts that will be my friends for the rest of my life. I have opponents that I'm grateful for.
Yes.
I mean, these are one of the essential things about we were talking about these benefits of martial arts training, but being social. I'll tell you another really beautiful story too. There's a guy named Sean Strickland, and anybody who follows Fighting the Life, you're going to bring up Sean Strickland in a positive light, because he says a lot of things I don't necessarily agree with. But I interviewed him 2 weeks ago, and he said some beautiful things. He was saying how he was bullied as a kid, and he was also raised by white supremacists. Okay, and he's like, yeah, you have like a Nazi background, and he goes, and then you get into martial arts, and you never realize like. We all side with the victim, but why is the bully the bully? Why is the bully the bully? Why is he in this particular situation? He goes, and he had a terrible home life. And then he mentioned that I couldn't be a white supremacist anymore when I realized that all the people who were helping me were of different races.
Yeah, I love that.
So martial arts schools bring people together from all walks of life, and that is a beautiful part of it too.
That is 100% the truth. There are people that I started martial arts when I was 14, and there are people that I still know that shoot me a message like, happy New Year and things like that. We just stay in touch throughout the years, and it's been a long time since I was 14. So you're right about that. There's a great social bond that's there. And when you do physical activities together, it does tend to strengthen those social bonds a lot more. So fight sports, dancing, gymnastics, when you work with your gymnastics team, like when you're in a team environment, those type of things really do create bonding experiences. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Phoenix Carnevale. She is a martial artist, and not just a martial artist. She is singing the praises and passing along the benefits of doing martial arts training. In addition, so you guys are all gym people, you're personal trainers, but to start implementing martial training into your toolbox, because that could be something that you eventually start to coach as well, whether that's boxing, kickboxing, the Muay Thai, the stand-up games, the judo, the jiu-jitsu, whatever practice that you're going into, that you're training, you can eventually bring that to your clients as well, and it opens a lot of doors. With that being said, I want to thank my guest, Phoenix, for being here with us today. Phoenix, if you don't mind, give people social media, how they can reach out to you, how they can follow you.
I'm super easy to find. It's just Phoenix Carnevale on Instagram and all of the other places. And I hope you reach out to me if you're looking for a martial arts school. I'm like Yelp. I'll help you find one, and I hope you get into some training.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Phoenix, for being here. I want to say thank you to all of you. Like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family. Keep inspiring people to fitness. If you want to reach out to me, you can do so at rick.richey@nasm.org or hit me up on Instagram at dr.rickrichey. This has been the NASM CPT Podcast.